Minister, last week the National Restoration Law was passed in Brussels, and I was listening to your speech in my office, and you said we have 24 months now to get what we need in place for this to work effectively. And I will be working closely with you, Minister, on those 24 months to ensure that the farmers aren't the ones that pay for national restoration. And I was very interested to listen to you in your speech to say that we made the mistakes with designation in the past. And that is most definitely the case. In my county, we have a significant number of land that is designated. And the capital value of that land has been completely decimated. And in my experience, I have never seen landowners or property owners that this was allowed to happen to before. And the litmus test of restoration for rural Ireland will be if the capital value of that land is maintained. And that's something that we have to make sure happens. When the Hen-Harrier designation came in my county, there was a scheme brought in with it, which was relatively attractive for the landowners. And for the first 3 or 4 years, they got a reasonable payment for the designation of their land. But that payment dried up to a trickle, and they're left with now a very small payment. Where they have nesting hen harriers, it increased slightly. But the blanket ban on forestry in those areas has absolutely decimated the value of their land, and we cannot allow that to happen with restoration. So, we will be seeing closely, and, we're here and we talk about food security and what Europe is going to do and sustainable food production. And, when you talk to farmers out on the ground, Brazil have announced in the last couple of weeks they're going to increase their beef production by 20% by 2027. That's at the expense of the rainforests. China is increasing domestic production of food very, very significantly, especially in regard to dairy products. They're not looking at emissions, they're not looking at climate change, they're only concerned with food security and driving forward food production in those countries. Now, I'm not saying that we don't produce sustainable food. Yes, by all means we do. But we cannot blindfold ourselves to what's happening in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And we have to be seriously concerned that there's not a universal global policy as regards to sustainability of food production. And at the moment, that is most definitely not happening. And Europe, they're most definitely the pioneers, but the rest of the world is definitely not following as we debate this here this evening. Wetting, Minister, and will farmers whose land is adjacent to a wetting project get a written guarantee that the water table on their land won't be affected? And I've met numerous farmers groups who are extremely worried, especially about Bonamona's land, because there is commercial farmers adjacent to Bonamona land. And if that land is re-wetted, will it have an impact on their water table? And if it does, it takes away the whole economic viability of that holding. And those farmers have been looking for that written guarantee now for a number of years. And that guarantee hasn't been forthcoming. And this is something, Minister, that in the 24 months that we have in getting protocol for restoration, that most definitely has to be addressed. Upland areas, and there is a lot of cattle being produced in upland areas, specifically our suckler herd, and a lot of sheep production. And we have promoted the organic sheep production that's produced on our hills, and we have got a very significant niche market for them. Again, that is bound to be impacted by this restoration laws, and again the compensation has to be in place. Re-wetting is of areas is obviously going to be a significant part of restoration. But, you know, we have a policy at the moment of a lack of maintenance of our rivers and streams. Is this going to continue unabated? And, you know, houses in my constituency are getting flooded, and increasing numbers each year, because the rivers and streams in the locality haven't been cleaned for a long number of years. A lot of very productive farmland is now being affected by the fact that streams and rivers aren't being maintained. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember when these rivers and streams were done on a regular basis. And when they were cleaned and maintained, there was significant fish populations in those rivers. So this nonsense that maintenance of rivers will destroy the habitats for fish is just that, it's nonsense. The maintenance of rivers will not affect the fish population in those rivers. And, you know, I had an angling club on to me there a number of weeks ago who can't have angling competitions on the shore because they can't get access to the river banks, because the briars, etc., are gone out of control. And a part, you know, a historical, very good fishing part of the river shore. And it really makes nonsense that, you know, that the lack of maintenance, you know, is having such an effect on an angling sport. So, Minister, you know, this has to stop, and this is having a huge economic impact on rural Ireland. And our rivers have to be what they're for. That's to get water away as quickly as possible when it falls on farmland, and allow that farmland to be productive. Wetting will create, you know, habitats and you know, back in bogs, etc. And I brought this point up with your minister previously here in a topical about invasive species. And I saw during the week, you know, where you have extra funding. And I think now is the time, Minister, to tackle these invasive species. These habitats, you know, especially, you know, habitats in damp areas, will have a lot of ground nesting birds. And ground nesting birds, Minister, will not survive where mink is prevalent. We also have the problem of cormorants, which, you know, are coming more and more inland and destroying large numbers of fish, and, you know, habitats as well, because, you know, islands in rivers, etc., the foliage on those is being completely destroyed by them. But, you know, we have to address the issue of these invasive species, because it's no use putting the structures in place that would allow these habitats to develop if the native species that we want to see in them are being killed off by mink, etc. And I think now, Minister, you know, at this crossroads, when we have restoration, this restoration coming in, we need to put a budget in place that will deal with those invasive species and keep them under control. Forestry, and, you know, forestry has been mentioned in the speeches by the ministers there earlier. And, you know, I'm chairman of the Oireachtas, of the Agriculture Oireachtas Committee in this stall, and privileged to be in that position. But our forestry policy is not working. And, you know, we have thrown significant amount of money at forestry in the last 12 to 18 months with a new forestry policy. But figures don't lie. And our acreage under forestry is actually now dropping. We have virtually no afforestation taking place. And farmers are deciding, you know, with their feet that it's not economical to plant forestry. So we need to go back and re-examine this. And, you know, we have now designated land with a blanket ban, unenclosed land a blanket ban, and, you know, land with a certain level of peat a blanket ban. And in our committee, we've had environmental scientists who come in before us and say that those blanket bans are actually hindering the creation of the habitats that we're trying to create. And at different stages of afforestation, in some or all of those areas, would actually help the creation of proper habitats for the wildlife and the bird life that we're trying to protect and allow to increase. So, you know, we have significant targets for afforestation. And afforestation, is key part to meeting our emissions targets, etc. And we need to go back and review where we are with forestry policy. In our programme for government, we have a target of 8,000 hectares per year of afforestation. I would say when this government comes to its close, whether it is in 6 months or 12 months' time, whenever the next election will come, we won't have met 8,000 hectares in the lifetime of this government. And that's a serious indictment of us and of our forestry policy that is just not working. I work closely with Quilta and the private contractors, and they, have what they see as solutions to the lack of afforestation. And I urge, and I have argued this with the Minister repeatedly, we need to get those stakeholders on side, and we need to show farmers that forestry can be profitable. And one of the major issues is that if you have forested land at the moment, you have to leave a third of that land idle. And people are not just going to make that decision, because when it's fit to clear fell in 35 years' time, the profitability of that land will be hugely hindered by the amount of land that has to be left for biodiversity. So we have to do the balance sheet. Forestry and having materials for building in 35 years' time will be hugely important. And in my view, the balance sheet isn't being done correctly at the moment. Minister, there has been media focus on the cap payments for land that will be in restoration. Those payments have to be guaranteed. That's absolutely essential. But guaranteed those for the next 5 or 7 years is not enough. They have to be guaranteed for several generations. Because the physical changes that will happen to land now under restoration won't be able to be reversed in any short period of time. So it's not just enough to guarantee those cap payments for the next 5 years or the next 7 years. They have to be guaranteed for a very extended period of time. And, people with land that will be designated now for restoration have to have environmental schemes in place that will allow the income lost to be gained through those various schemes. That is going to be the acid test for restoration. And if we have schemes in place, as well as having the single farm payment for those farmers, if we have schemes in place that will allow an income to be generated, that will ensure that this restoration will be a success. And it will maintain the capital value of those lands that will be in restoration. And I'll finish where I started. The litmus test is that land that is designated for restoration will not lose its capital value. And we have to lose the next 2 years to ensure that that happens. Thank you, Laska.